The clock on the microwave read 8:43 p.m. when Lily Sullivan finally closed the door of her apartment behind her. She dropped her heavy briefcase on the floor with a thud and kicked off her uncomfortable high heels. The cool wooden floor felt like heaven against her tired feet. She had been in court all day, fighting for a client who couldn't afford to lose his case. Being a public defender wasn't glamorous, but it gave her purpose. She rolled her shoulders back and let out a deep sigh. The apartment was quiet and still, just as she had left it that morning. Lily lived alone in a small but cozy two-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. The neighborhood was mostly young professionals and small families, the kind of place where people nodded hello but didn't ask too many questions. What a day, she mumbled to herself, heading straight to the fridge. She pulled out a half-empty bottle of white wine and poured herself a generous glass. The first sip washed away some of the tension in her shoulders. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "How did the Wilson case go?" She smiled slightly, typing back, "We won. Judge ruled in our favor. Talk tomorrow?" The reply came almost immediately. "Proud of you, kiddo." Lily put her phone down and took another sip of wine. Her relationship with her father had always been complicated. He had high expectations, came from a completely different world than the one she chose to work in, but he supported her nonetheless. Few people in her daily life knew who her father was, and that's exactly how she wanted it. She glanced around her apartment. Dishes from breakfast still in the sink, case files spread across the coffee table, a jacket thrown over the back of a chair. Her life was messy, but it was hers. Bath time, she decided, setting down her wine glass. Lily made her way to the bathroom, turning on the hot water in the tub and adding a generous amount of lavender-scented bubble bath. As the tub filled, she lit a few candles and turned off the harsh overhead light. This was her ritual after difficult days: a hot bath, candles, and complete silence. She undressed slowly, her body aching from sitting tensely in the courtroom all day. Her suit, which had felt crisp and professional this morning, now felt like a prison. She tossed it into the hamper and caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Tired eyes, hair falling out of what had been a neat bun, the weight of the day visible on her face. The hot water welcomed her as she sank into the tub, bubbles rising around her shoulders. She closed her eyes and let her mind empty. No more thinking about witness testimonies or legal precedents. No more worrying about clients who couldn't pay their rent if they lost their case. Just the warm water and the scent of lavender. Lily didn't know it, but exactly 2.7 miles away, Officer Rick Donovan was having a very different kind of evening. "Everyone clear on the plan?" Sergeant Hayes asked, looking around the cramped briefing room at the 6 officers in tactical gear. Rick nodded along with the others. This would be his first drug raid, and despite his 5 years on the force, he felt his heart racing. The department had been building a case against a mid-level dealer named Dante Reynolds for months, and tonight, they finally had enough to move in. Address is 1472 Elmwood Avenue, apartment 3B, Hayes continued, pointing to a map on the screen. Subject is known to be armed, has priors for assault. We go in fast, secure the scene, no mistakes. Officer Chen raised her hand. Intel says he's alone tonight? As far as we know, Hayes confirmed. His girlfriend is out of town according to surveillance. Any other questions? Rick studied the photo of the apartment building. Standard 3-story complex, not unlike dozens of others in the city. He checked his vest one more time, a habit he'd developed early in his career. "Donovan, you and Chen take the bathroom and back bedroom," Hayes instructed. "Torres and I will take point on entry. Jackson and Miller secure the living area." They all nodded, the room filled with the sound of equipment checks and radio tests. "Let's roll in 20, Hayes announced, gathering his papers. As the team dispersed, to make final preparations, Rick pulled out his phone to send a quick text to his wife. "Should be home by midnight. Don't wait up." At the evidence desk, Officer Torres was signing for the warrant when the clerk handed him the paperwork. 72 Elmwood, apartment 3B, Torres confirmed, signing his name. The clerk nodded, but then frowned slightly as he looked at his computer screen. "That's weird." "What?" Torres asked, already turning to leave. "Nothing." the clerk said, shaking his head. System just glitched for a second. You're good to go. What the clerk didn't notice was that when he'd pulled up the address, the system had briefly flashed a different entry, 1427 Elmwood Avenue, apartment 3B, before correcting itself. A simple transposition of numbers that would have massive consequences. Back at the station, dispatch supervisor Marla Thompson was juggling 3 different incidents when the raid team's paperwork came across her desk for final verification. She glanced at the address, cross-referenced it with their target database, and moved on to the next emergency. The small error went unnoticed once again. At 9:15 p.m., 2 unmarked vans pulled up a block away from 1427 Elmwood Avenue. The team didn't know they were at the wrong address. They didn't know that apartment 3B was occupied not by Dante Reynolds, a drug dealer with a record of violence, but by Lily Sullivan, a public defender who was currently soaking in a bubble bath. Comms check. Hayes whispered into his radio as they approached the building. 5 affirmative responses came through his earpiece. The team moved silently up the stairs, their footsteps barely audible. Years of training had taught them how to move like shadows. Rick felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as they positioned themselves outside what they believed was their target's door. Hayes held up his hand, counting down with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. The battering ram hit the door with a thunderous crash, splintering the frame. The door flew open, banging against the wall inside. Police! Search warrant! Everyone on the ground! Hayes shouted as they stormed in. Inside her bathroom, Lily's peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of her front door being smashed open. Her eyes flew open, her body frozen in shock. For a split second, she thought it might be a neighbor's apartment or maybe something had fallen. Then she heard the shouts. Police! Don't move! Search warrant! Her mind raced. Police? A search warrant? For her apartment? It didn't make any sense. Before she could process what was happening, the bathroom door burst open. Rick and Chen stood there, weapons raised, tactical lights blinding her. Hands where I can see them, Chen shouted. Lily instinctively covered herself with her arms, sinking deeper into the bubbles. What is happening? She screamed, her voice high with terror. Out of the tub. Now, Rick ordered, his face a mask of professional detachment that hid his own confusion. This was not what they had expected to find. I'm naked, Lily protested, her lawyer's mind already racing through possible scenarios, none of which made sense. I need my towel. Chen lowered her weapon slightly and grabbed a towel from the rack, tossing it toward the tub while maintaining her position at the door. You have 5 seconds to get out and wrap that around you, she said, her voice slightly less harsh but still commanding. With trembling hands, Lily grabbed the towel and stood up, water cascading off her body. She wrapped the towel around herself, her movements clumsy with fear and confusion. Step out of the tub slowly, Rick instructed, backing up slightly to give her space to exit. Lily did as she was told, her feet slipping slightly on the wet floor. I don't understand, she said, her lawyer training kicking in despite her fear. I want to see your warrant. I have rights. Hayes appeared in the doorway behind them. Bathroom clear? 1 female subject, unarmed, Chen reported. No sign of Reynolds or any contraband. Hayes frowned. Who are you? He demanded, looking at Lily. I'm Lily Sullivan. This is my apartment. I live alone, she replied, her voice steadier now as anger began to replace fear. I'm an attorney, and I know my rights. I want to see your warrant right now. The officers exchanged glances. Something wasn't right. The warrant is for 1472 Elmwood Avenue, apartment 3B, Hayes stated. Residence of Dante Reynolds. Lily's eyes widened. This is 1427 Elmwood, not 1472, and I've never heard of anyone named Dante Reynolds. A heavy silence fell over the bathroom, as the realization of what had happened began to dawn on everyone present. Hayes's face paled visibly. Check the apartment, he ordered Torres and Miller, who had appeared behind him. Full sweep. Rick lowered his weapon completely, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. Wrong address raids were rare but not unheard of, and they almost always ended badly. for everyone involved. "Ma'am, if this is a mistake, we'll sort it out quickly," he said to Lily, who stood shivering in her towel, water dripping onto the floor around her feet. "This is definitely a mistake," she replied, her eyes flashing with anger. "And it's going to be a very, very expensive one for your department." Little did the officers know just how right she was, or just who Lily Sullivan's father was. The night was about to get much worse for everyone involved. Lily stood in her living room, now dressed in a worn Harvard Law sweatshirt and yoga pants, her wet hair dripping onto her shoulders. Her hands were still shaking, but her voice remained remarkably steady as she faced the 6 police officers who had invaded her home. "I want all of your badge numbers and names," she said, holding a notepad she'd grabbed from her kitchen counter. "And I want the name of your commanding officer." Sergeant Hayes looked deeply uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset." "Upset?" Lily cut him off. "You broke down my door while I was taking a bath. You pointed guns at me. You violated my Fourth Amendment rights. Upset doesn't begin to cover what I am right now." The officers exchanged nervous glances. The apartment had been thoroughly searched in minutes, confirming what was now obvious to everyone. They had the wrong address. There were no drugs, no weapons, nothing illegal at all. Just law books, case files, and the normal belongings of a young professional woman. Officer Rick Donovan couldn't meet Lily's eyes. In 5 years on the force, he'd never been part of such a colossal mistake. The wrongful raid would be bad enough if the victim had been anyone, but something about this woman told him she wasn't just anyone. The way she spoke, the confidence, even in this situation, the legal terminology that rolled off her tongue. She wasn't bluffing about being an attorney. "We're going to need to file an incident report," Hayes said, his voice now much more subdued. "Officer Chen will take your statement." "I'm not giving any statement without my own legal representation present," Lily replied coldly. "That's your right," Hayes nodded. "But we need to document what happened here." Lily looked at her splintered front door hanging off its hinges. "I think what happened is pretty clear, Sergeant. You raided the wrong apartment." Hayes rubbed his forehead. "We'll have someone come fix your door immediately." "And where am I supposed to stay tonight? In an apartment with no functional front door? We can arrange for—" "I'll handle it myself," Lily interrupted. She reached for her phone on the coffee table. "I'm making a call, and then you can all explain to my father exactly what happened here tonight." The officers watched as she dialed, none of them fully grasping the significance of that statement yet. Lily put the phone to her ear, her eyes never leaving Hayes's face. After a moment, she spoke into the phone. "Dad? It's me. I need you to listen carefully." Her voice was controlled, professional. "I'm at my apartment. About 20 minutes ago, a police tactical team broke down my door while I was in the bath. They had a warrant for a different address. They held me at gunpoint." She paused. "Yes. I'm okay physically. No, I'm not hurt." Another pause. "They're still here." Officer Chen shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her colleagues. Something about the way Lily was speaking to her father made Chen's stomach knot up. "I think you should talk to them directly," Lily said into the phone. "Here's Sergeant Hayes." She held out the phone to the stunned sergeant. Hayes took the phone reluctantly. "This is Sergeant Michael Hayes, Metro PD." The other officers couldn't hear the voice on the other end of the line, but they watched as the color drained from their sergeant's face. Hayes stood straighter, his posture unconsciously shifting to attention. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir." "No, sir, there was no— It appears to have been a clerical error with the address, sir." The other officers exchanged glances. Whoever was on the phone had their normally unflappable sergeant stammering like a rookie. "Yes, sir, right away, sir." Hayes lowered the phone and handed it back to Lily, who took it with a grim expression. "Who was that?" Officer Miller whispered to Donovan. Before Rick could respond, Hayes turned to the team, his face ashen. "We need to call Captain Reynolds. Now." "What's going on?" Chen asked. Hayes looked at Lily, then back to his team. "That was Director Sullivan, FBI." A heavy silence fell over the room. Even officers who didn't follow bureau politics knew that name. Director Thomas Sullivan was not only the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but was known for his uncompromising stance on police accountability and proper procedure. And they had just held his daughter at gunpoint in her bathroom. "He'll be here in 20 minutes, Lily said, settling onto her couch and crossing her legs. "He was at a dinner downtown. I suggested you all wait for him." The calm in her voice now carried an unmistakable edge. Hayes turned to Torres. "Call the captain now. Tell him to get here immediately." Torres nodded and stepped into the hallway, already dialing. Hayes looked back at Lily. "Ms. Sullivan, I want to personally apologize for this incident. There is no excuse for what happened." Lily regarded him coolly. "You're right. There isn't." In the next 30 minutes, Lily's apartment transformed from a crime scene to what felt like a high-level government meeting. Captain Reynolds arrived first, a barrel-chested man with salt and pepper hair who took one look at the situation and immediately ordered all officers except Hayes to wait downstairs. "Ms. Sullivan," the captain said, his voice gentle but firm, "I cannot begin to express my department's regret for what happened tonight." Lily had made herself a cup of tea and sat calmly at her kitchen table. "Captain, I appreciate the sentiment, but I think we should wait for my father." As if on cue, there was a knock at the broken door. A tall man in his early 60s stood in the doorway, wearing an expensive suit despite the late hour. His face was lined with both age and authority, his posture military straight despite having clearly come from a formal event. "Lily," he said, his eyes quickly assessing her for any signs of injury. "I'm okay, Dad," she assured him, standing up. Director Sullivan stepped into the apartment, followed by a younger man in a dark suit who remained by the door, scanning the room with practiced efficiency. Hayes and Captain Reynolds stood at attention almost involuntarily. "Director Sullivan," the captain began, "I'm Captain James Reynolds, Metro PD. This is an inexcusable error on our department's part." Sullivan barely glanced at him, walking straight to his daughter and placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure you're all right?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," she insisted. "Angry, but fine." Sullivan nodded once, then turned to face the police officers. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice deceptively soft, "I would like a full explanation of how a trained tactical team managed to raid the wrong apartment and hold my daughter at gunpoint while she was in her bath." Captain Reynolds cleared his throat. "Sir, we're already investigating. It appears there was a transposition of numbers in the address on the warrant. 1472 was mistakenly entered as 1427. "A clerical error," Sullivan said flatly. "Yes, sir." "And your verification procedures?" The captain hesitated. "There was a breakdown in protocol, sir. Multiple checkpoints should have caught this error." Sullivan's eyes narrowed slightly. "So not just one mistake, but a cascade of failures." "Yes, sir." The director walked slowly around the apartment, taking in the splintered door, the disarray, from the search. "Captain, I'm sure you understand that this incident represents not just a departmental failure but a fundamental violation of my daughter's civil rights." "Yes, sir. I could, if I were so inclined, make this a federal case. I could have your entire chain of command investigated for civil rights violations. I could personally see that every officer involved never works in law enforcement again." The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Hayes swallowed hard, his career flashing before his eyes. "Dad," Lily said quietly. All eyes turned to her. "That's not what I want." Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "What do you want, Lily?" She set down her tea mug. "I want accountability, not revenge. These officers made a terrible mistake, but destroying their careers won't fix the system that allowed it to happen." The room was silent as Sullivan considered his daughter's words. "Captain," Lily continued, "I want a full review of your warrant verification procedures. I want new protocols put in place to prevent this from happening to someone else. And I want officer training on proper interaction with civilians during raids." Captain Reynolds nodded slowly. "That's more than reasonable, Ms. Sullivan." And she added, "I want to be part of the review committee that implements these changes." Sullivan looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. You're already overworked at the public defender's office. This matters, Dad, she said firmly. Next time it could be someone who doesn't have the FBI director on speed dial. Sullivan's expression softened slightly. He turned back to the captain. You heard my daughter's terms. I expect them to be met fully and promptly. Additionally, the department will cover all expenses for repairs to her apartment and provide appropriate temporary accommodations. His tone made it clear this was not a request. Of course, sir, Captain Reynolds agreed quickly. And Captain, Sullivan added, his voice dropping to an even more dangerous register, if I find that any officer retaliates against my daughter in any way for this incident, I will personally ensure they face the full extent of both departmental and federal consequences. Am I understood? Crystal clear, sir. As the gravity of the situation settled over everyone in the room, Officer Chen appeared in the doorway. Sir, she addressed the captain. The media is outside. All heads turned toward her. The media, Captain Reynolds repeated, his face paling further. How did they find out so quickly? Scanner traffic, probably, Hayes suggested, though he looked equally disturbed by this development. Sullivan and his daughter exchanged a look. The night was far from over. The flash of cameras created an eerie strobe effect through Lily's broken doorway. In the hallway outside her apartment, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors in pajamas and robes, wide-eyed and whispering, along with 3 reporters who had somehow managed to get past the building's security door. This is a closed scene, Officer Chen was saying, trying to block the doorway with her body. You need to step back. Is it true the FBI director is inside? One reporter called out, thrusting a microphone forward. No comment, Chen replied firmly. Captain Reynolds rubbed his temples. This situation was spiraling out of control by the minute. He turned back to Director Sullivan and Lily. Sir, we should move this conversation elsewhere. For privacy. Sullivan nodded, his face unreadable. My security team has arranged a hotel suite for Lily. We can continue there. He turned to his daughter. Pack what you need for a few days. Lily disappeared into her bedroom, leaving the men in uncomfortable silence. From her room, she could hear the muffled sounds of the commotion outside. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled clothes from drawers and hangers, stuffing them haphazardly into an overnight bag. The adrenaline that had kept her composed was beginning to wear off, leaving her feeling shaky and vulnerable. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against the dresser. This wasn't the first time her father's position had complicated her life, but it was certainly the most dramatic. She had worked so hard to build a life separate from his shadow, choosing public defense work instead of a cushy federal position, living in a modest apartment instead of accepting help to buy something grander. She valued her independence, fiercely, and now in an instant she was back to being the FBI director's daughter. Lily zipped her bag with more force than necessary. She wasn't going to let this incident derail her life or her career. Somehow she would turn this disaster into something positive, for herself and for others who might face similar situations without her advantages. When she returned to the living room, she found her father speaking in hushed tones with a woman in a dark pantsuit who hadn't been there before. The woman nodded at whatever Sullivan was saying, then stepped away, speaking quietly into her wrist mic. Who's that? Lily asked. Agent Keller, Sullivan replied. She'll be coordinating your security detail for the next few days. Lily frowned. I don't need a security detail. It's not negotiable, her father said, his tone gentle but firm. Once the press identifies you, you'll be hounded. Not to mention potential retaliation from anyone with a grudge against me or the Bureau. Dad, I'm a public defender. Half my clients have grudges against law enforcement. I can handle myself. Sullivan's expression softened slightly. I know you can, but humor your old man on this one. Before Lily could argue further, Agent Keller returned. Director, the perimeter is secure. We're ready to move. Sullivan nodded, then turned to Captain Reynolds. We'll expect your department's official incident report by noon tomorrow. My office will be in touch regarding Ms. Sullivan's proposed reforms. Reynolds nodded stiffly. Yes, sir. Sullivan placed a protective hand on Lily's back as Agent Keller led them toward a service elevator at the end of the hall, away from the gathering of reporters and neighbors. 2 more agents materialized, forming a barrier between the Sullivans and the onlookers. Officer Rick Donovan watched them go, a knot forming in his stomach. In 5 years of law enforcement, he'd never been involved in such a high-profile mistake. As the least senior officer on the raid team, he wondered if he'd be the one thrown under the bus when the department needed a scapegoat. "Donovan," Sergeant Hayes called, breaking into his thoughts. "Let's go. Back to the station for debrief." The next several hours passed in a blur of paperwork, interviews, and mounting anxiety. The raid team was sequestered in a conference room at headquarters, each officer interviewed separately by internal affairs. By 3 a.m., exhaustion had set in, but no one was being allowed to go home. "This is bad, isn't it?" Officer Miller asked. No one in particular as they waited for their next round of questioning. Hayes looked up from the table where he'd been staring at his coffee cup. "It's a mess," he admitted, "but we followed procedure." "Except for verifying the address," Torres pointed out. "That was dispatch's mistake," Chen argued. "It doesn't matter who made the mistake," Rick said quietly. "We're all responsible. We held an innocent woman at gunpoint in her own home." The room fell silent, each officer contemplating the potential end of their careers. The door opened, and Captain Reynolds entered, looking as if he'd aged 10 years in the last few hours. "Listen up," he said without preamble. "The chief wants preliminary statements from each of you by 8 a.m. The mayor's office is involved now, and the press is running with the story. This has turned into a major incident." "What's going to happen?" Chen asked, voicing what they were all thinking. Reynolds sighed heavily. "I don't know yet, but Director Sullivan has significant influence, and his daughter is apparently determined to use this incident to push for departmental reforms." "Are we going to be fired?" Miller asked bluntly. "I'm fighting to make sure that doesn't happen," Reynolds said. "But there will be consequences. Suspensions at minimum, possibly reassignments." He looked around the room, meeting each officer's eyes. "Be honest in your statements. Don't try to cover anything up or shift blame. That will only make things worse." Across town, in a luxury hotel suite, Lily sat curled in an armchair, wrapped in a plush robe provided by the hotel. The room was elegant and spacious, nothing like her modest apartment. 2 FBI agents stood guard outside her door, while her father worked the phones from the suite's separate living area. She scrolled through news headlines on her tablet. FBI director's daughter victim of police raid gone wrong, mistaken address, leads to embarrassing police blunder. Questions raised about police raid procedures after high-profile mistake. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop with messages from colleagues, friends, and even old law school classmates who had seen the news. She had responded to only a few: her boss at the public defender's office, her closest friend, and her mother, who was currently traveling in Europe. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Her father entered, looking weary but composed. "You should get some sleep," he said, sitting on the edge of the coffee table in front of her chair. "I don't think I can," Lily admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see those officers bursting into my bathroom." Sullivan's jaw tightened. "I've spoken with the Attorney General. There will be a full federal review of the incident. Dad, I told you I don't want to destroy these officers' careers. This isn't just about you anymore, Lily. This incident has highlighted serious procedural failures that put innocent people at risk. What if they had shot first and asked questions later?" Lily shuddered at the thought. She had represented enough clients who had been on the receiving end of police mistakes to know how differently her situation could have ended. "The department has agreed to your conditions," Sullivan continued. "You'll be part of the review committee, but there's something else we need to discuss." Lily raised an eyebrow questioningly. "The press is digging. They've already connected you to several high-profile cases you've handled at the public defender's office. They're painting a narrative about you deliberately hiding your connection to me while defending clients charged by federal agencies." "That's ridiculous," Lily protested. "My work has nothing to do with you or the FBI. You and I know that, but the public might see it differently. There are already calls for you to step down from certain cases due to perceived conflicts of interest. Lily stood up abruptly. No, I won't let them force me out of my job because of who my father is. That's exactly why I never used your name or connections. I know, Sullivan said gently. And I've always respected your independence. But this situation has put a spotlight on you that won't fade quickly. So, what are you suggesting? That I quit? That I hide? No. I'm suggesting you use this visibility strategically. You wanted to make changes to the system. Now you have the platform to do it. Lily paced the plush carpet, her mind racing. The media attention could actually help push through the reforms faster, she mused. And if I'm public about my dual perspective, daughter of law enforcement and defender of the accused, it might make people listen who wouldn't otherwise. Sullivan nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. Exactly. Lily stopped pacing and looked at her father. I'll need to make a statement, something that acknowledges what happened without vilifying the officers involved. I think that's wise. And I want to meet with them again, not as the FBI director's daughter, but as Lily Sullivan, attorney. I want to understand what happened, from their perspective. Sullivan looked skeptical. Are you sure that's a good idea? Yes, Lily said firmly. If I'm going to advocate for change, I need to understand all sides, including the officers who broke down my door. As the first light of dawn filtered through the hotel windows, Lily and her father continued to strategize. Neither of them realized that across the city, Officer Rick Donovan was making a decision of his own, one that would either save or end his career in law enforcement. 3 days after the raid, Lily sat in a conference room at police headquarters, a stack of documents in front of her. The room was designed to intimidate, all hard surfaces and uncomfortable chairs. But Lily was no stranger to unwelcoming government spaces. As a public defender, she had spent countless hours in rooms, just like this one. The door opened and Chief Wilson entered, followed by Captain Reynolds and the department's legal counsel, a tight-lipped woman named Patricia Donner. Ms. Sullivan, the chief said, offering his hand. Thank you for coming in today. Lily shook, his hand firmly. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. They settled around the table, an uncomfortable silence hanging in the air until Chief Wilson cleared his throat. Before we begin, I want to personally apologize for the incident at your apartment. It was an inexcusable breach of protocol, and I take full responsibility as the head of this department. Lily nodded. I appreciate that, Chief, but as I've said before, I'm not interested in apologies as much as I am in solutions. Of course. The chief gestured to the legal counsel, who slid a folder across the table. We've prepared a settlement offer, Donner explained, her voice clipped and professional. It includes compensation for damages to your property, personal distress, and a non-disclosure agreement. Lily didn't touch the folder. I'm not signing an NDA. The 3 department representatives exchanged glances. Ms. Sullivan, Donner began, carefully. This is a very generous offer. I don't care about the money, Lily interrupted, and I won't be silenced about what happened. Not when it could help prevent similar incidents in the future. Captain Reynolds leaned forward. What exactly are you looking for here? Lily opened her own folder and pulled out a document. This is a proposal for reforms I'd like to see implemented. It includes triple verification protocols for addresses on warrants, mandatory body cameras during all raids, better training for officers on civilian interactions during high-stress situations, and a civilian review board with actual authority. The chief accepted the document with a frown. These are extensive changes. Yes, they are, Lily agreed, and they're all reasonable. None of them would have prevented your officers from doing their jobs that night. They just would have made sure they were doing it at the right address and with proper accountability. We already have body camera requirements, Donner pointed out, but no consequences when officers fail to activate them, Lily countered. And no independent review of the footage. The chief skimmed through the document. Some of these proposals would require union approval. Then get it, Lily said simply. This isn't just about me. It's about every person in this city who doesn't have an FBI director for a father. Who would they call when armed officers burst into their home by mistake? The room fell silent again as her words sank in. We'll need time to review these proposals, the chief finally said. Take all the time you need, Lily replied. But I should mention that I've been asked to testify before the city council next week about the incident. I'd like to be able to say that the department is working with me on meaningful reforms. It wasn't quite a threat, but the implication was clear. The chief's expression tightened. There's one more thing, Lily added. I'd like to meet with the officers who were involved in the raid. Captain Reynolds looked surprised. May I ask why? I want to hear their side of the story, and I want them to hear mine, not as the FBI director's daughter, but as a citizen whose rights were violated. The chief and captain exchanged glances. I don't think that's a good idea, Donner interjected. With potential disciplinary actions pending, actually, the chief interrupted, I think it might be helpful. He looked at Lily with newfound respect. I'll arrange it. Tomorrow? Lily nodded. Tomorrow. Across town, Officer Rick Donovan sat on a bench in a quiet park, nervously checking his watch. The past 3 days had been the most stressful of his career. The raid team had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation, and rumors were flying about who would take the fall. A man in a suit approached and sat down beside him. Officer Donovan? The man asked. Rick nodded. I'm Jerome Patterson, from the district attorney's office. He offered his hand. Rick shook it cautiously. Thanks for meeting me. Your message said it was urgent, Patterson said. Something about the Sullivan raid? Rick took a deep breath. There's something that wasn't included in the official report. Something I think you should know. Patterson raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. The address mix-up wasn't just a typo. I was there when Officer Torres picked up the warrant. The clerk noticed something odd in the system. A glitch, he said, but nobody followed up. What kind of glitch? I don't know exactly, but I heard him mention it and Torres just brushed it off. We were in a hurry to get the raid going. Rick looked down at his hands. If we'd taken 5 minutes to double-check, none of this would have happened. Patterson studied him carefully. Why are you telling me this and not internal affairs? Because I already tried, Rick said bitterly. My statement was edited. The department is looking to pin this on a clerical error, not officer negligence. You understand what you're doing? Patterson asked. This could be seen as turning against your fellow officers. Rick nodded slowly. I know. But becoming a cop was my dream job. I wanted to help people, do the right thing. If I stay quiet now, what was it all for? Patterson seemed to make a decision. Ms. Sullivan is meeting with your team tomorrow. I suggest you tell her what you just told me. Rick's eyes widened. She's meeting with us? Why? I think she wants to understand how this happened, Patterson said, standing up. And it sounds like you might be the one who can tell her. As Patterson walked away, Rick remained on the bench contemplating what tomorrow would bring, and whether he'd still have a badge by the end of it. The next morning, Lily arrived at the precinct dressed in her court attire, a simple navy suit that projected professionalism without ostentation. Her father had objected to her coming alone, but Lily had been firm. This was her meeting, not the FBI director's. She was escorted to a small conference room where 5 officers waited. Sergeant Hayes stood as she entered, the others following, his lead. Lily recognized each of them from that night. The woman who had thrown her the towel, the officer who had searched her bedroom, the one who had held the battering ram, and the youngest one, who had averted his eyes when she stood dripping in her towel. According to the report, his name was Officer Richard Donovan. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Lily began, taking a seat at the table. I know this isn't easy for any of us. Hayes cleared his throat. Ms. Sullivan, we all want to express our deepest regrets for what happened. I understand, Lily said. But I didn't come here for apologies. I came to listen, and to be listened to. She looked at each officer in turn. That night, you broke into my home while following what you believed were lawful orders. I was terrified, violated, and humiliated. But I know you were just doing your jobs. The officers shifted uncomfortably. What I want to understand is how it happened. Not the official version in the reports, but the real story. Who dropped the ball? What pressures were you under? What could have prevented it? Silence fell over the room. The officers exchanged nervous glances. Finally, Rick Donovan spoke up. There was a flag in the system, he said quietly. When the warrant was processed, the clerk noticed something off about the address, but we were in a hurry. Nobody followed up. Hayes shot him a warning look, but Rick continued. We were under pressure to make the bust that night. Our CI said the suspect might be moving his operation, so we rushed the verification process. Lily nodded thoughtfully. Thank you for your honesty, Officer Donovan. Ms. Sullivan, Hayes interjected. What Officer Donovan is describing is his personal interpretation of events. The official investigation will likely find that a series of small mistakes and rushed decisions led to a major violation of a citizen's rights. Lily finished for him. That's usually how these things happen. Rarely is it one person's fault. Entirely, she leaned forward. I'm not here to get anyone fired. I'm here because I believe we can make things better. As a public defender, I've seen too many cases where police mistakes had devastating consequences for people who didn't have my advantages. My knowledge of the law, my connections, my privilege. The room was silent as her words sank in. Officer Donovan, she said, turning to Rick, would you be willing to testify about what you just told me to the review board? Rick hesitated, then nodded. Yes, ma'am, I would. Hayes sighed heavily. Ms. Sullivan, what exactly are you hoping to achieve here? Lily met his eyes directly. Justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, Sergeant. It's about protecting the innocent. That night, your team failed to protect me. I want to make sure you don't fail the next person, because the next person might not be the FBI director's daughter. They might just be someone nobody listens to at all. As she spoke, Lily noticed something changing in the officer's expressions, from defensive wariness to reluctant understanding. Even Hayes seemed to be considering her words. Officer Chen spoke up. The address verification process is a mess. Has been for years. We've filed complaints about it before. Tell me more, Lily encouraged. As the officers began to open up, sharing the systemic issues they'd encountered, Lily realized she had found unlikely allies in her quest for reform. By the end of the meeting, even Hayes was contributing suggestions for improvements. Outside the precinct afterward, Lily checked her phone to find 3 missed calls from her father. She was about to return them when Officer Donovan approached her. Ms. Sullivan, he said hesitantly, I just wanted to say thank you for not making this about punishing us. Lily studied him for a moment. Officer Donovan, may I ask why you became a police officer? He seemed surprised by the question. To help people, to make a difference. That's why I became a public defender, she replied. Seems like we're not so different after all. As Rick walked away, Lily finally returned her father's call. Dad, she said when he answered, I think I'm going to need a bigger platform for what I'm planning. 6 months later, Lily stood at a podium in City Hall, camera flashes creating starbursts in her vision. The room was packed with reporters, city officials, police representatives, and community activists. At the front row sat her father, looking simultaneously proud and concerned, an expression she'd grown familiar with throughout her life. Today marks an important step forward, Lily said into the microphone, her voice steady and clear. The unanimous passage of the Civilian Protection Act by the City Council represents not just a victory for police accountability, but a new partnership between law enforcement and the communities they serve. She glanced down at her notes, then continued. 6 months ago, I was taking a bath in my apartment when police officers broke down my door due to a clerical error. I was held at gunpoint, terrified and confused. Many have suggested that the only reason I survived that night was because of who my father is. She paused, looking directly at the cameras. We'll never know if that's true. But what we do know is that similar raids happen across this city and this country every day, often with tragic consequences. In the back of the room, Officer Rick Donovan stood against the wall watching Lily speak. He was in uniform, recently returned to active duty after a 60-day suspension. The raid team had all faced disciplinary actions. Hayes had been demoted. 2 officers had transferred to different precincts, and Chen had taken early retirement. But Rick had faced the lightest consequences, largely due to his testimony before the review board. This new legislation requires triple verification of addresses before tactical raids, Lily continued. It mandates functioning body cameras during all police operations. It creates a truly independent civilian review board with real authority. And perhaps most importantly, it establishes new training protocols for officers on de-escalation and civilian interaction during high-stress situations. She looked toward Police Chief Wilson, who nodded slightly from his seat on the stage. Their relationship had evolved from adversarial to cautiously collaborative over the months of drafting and negotiating the legislation. I want to acknowledge the courage of several police officers who came forward to help identify the systemic problems that led to my experience. Change doesn't happen when we vilify individuals. It happens when we fix broken systems. Rick felt a surprising lump in his throat at her words. The past 6 months had been the hardest of his career. Some fellow officers now viewed him as a traitor for speaking out. Others had quietly thanked him, sharing their own stories of procedures they'd worried about but never reported. He wasn't sure if he'd made the right choice some days, but listening to Lily now, he felt a flicker of pride. This legislation isn't perfect, Lily admitted. No single law can solve all the complex issues in our criminal justice system, but it's a start, and it proves that even from traumatic experiences, positive change can emerge. As she finished her speech to enthusiastic applause, Lily felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind, testifying before the city council, endless meetings with police officials and community leaders, drafting and redrafting the legislation. All while continuing her work at the public defender's office, though with a reduced caseload. Her father approached as she stepped away from the podium. "Well done," he said simply, giving her a brief hug. "Thanks, Dad." She smiled, knowing how difficult this had been for him. Watching his daughter thrust herself into the public eye, unable to protect her from the criticism and occasional threats that had come her way. "Your mother called this morning," he said. "She's very proud. Wants you to call her after this is done." Lily nodded, her attention caught by someone approaching from the side of the room, Chief Wilson with Officer Donovan a few steps behind him. "Ms. Sullivan," the chief said, offering his hand. "Congratulations. You've accomplished something remarkable here." "Thank you, Chief. But I didn't do it alone." She shook his hand, then looked past him to Rick. "Officer Donovan, I'm glad you could be here today." Rick seemed surprised to be acknowledged. "Wouldn't have missed it, ma'am." Chief Wilson cleared his throat. "Actually, there's something we wanted to discuss with you. If you have a moment." Lily raised an eyebrow questioningly. "The new training program on civilian interaction that your legislation mandates, we'd like you to help develop it. Your perspective would be valuable." Lily blinked, genuinely surprised. "You want me, a public defender, to help train police officers?" "Who better?" the chief replied with a wry smile. "You've seen both sides now, and you've proven you're interested in solutions, not just pointing fingers." "I'll think about it," Lily said honestly. It was an intriguing proposition, though not without complications. As the chief moved away to speak with other officials, Rick hesitated, then stepped forward. "Ms. Sullivan, I just wanted to say, what happened that night, it changed things, for me, made me look at my job differently." "How so?" Lily asked. Rick seemed to struggle for words. "I always thought being a good cop meant following orders, backing up my team. But now I understand it's more complicated than that. Sometimes being a good cop means speaking up when things aren't right, even if it's uncomfortable." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "That's true in a lot of professions, including mine." "Anyway," Rick continued, "some of us have started an unofficial group Officers who want to do better, who support the reforms. We meet weekly to discuss cases, share concerns. It's small, but growing. That's unexpected, Lily admitted, and encouraging. We were wondering if you might be willing to come speak to us sometime, share your perspective. He quickly added, only if you're comfortable with that, of course. Before Lily could respond, her father approached, subtly signaling that other officials were waiting to speak with her. I'll be in touch, Officer Donovan, she promised, handing him her card. This conversation isn't over. Later that evening, Lily sat in her new apartment, a corner unit in a secure building with a view of the city park. Her father had insisted on helping with the security deposit after her old place had become unlivable, not just because of the broken door, but because the address had been publicized during the media coverage. She kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine, reflecting on the day's events. Her phone buzzed with a text from her boss at the public defender's office. Saw you on the news. We're all proud of you. But I hope this doesn't mean you're leaving us for politics. Lily smiled. That question had been coming up more frequently lately. Several political action groups had approached her about running for office, suggesting her unique background and high profile made her an ideal candidate for city council, or even the state legislature. The thought was simultaneously tempting and terrifying. Public service was in her blood. Her father had dedicated his life to it, and she had chosen a career defending those who couldn't defend themselves. But politics? That was a different arena entirely. Her doorbell rang, interrupting her thoughts. Through the security camera, she saw her two closest friends from law school, carrying takeout bags and bottles of champagne. She had almost forgotten they were coming over to celebrate. As she let them in and they filled her apartment with chatter and laughter, Lily felt herself relax for the first time in months. Whatever came next, whether continuing as a public defender, helping train police officers, or exploring new paths, she knew that the traumatic night 6 months ago had changed her life's trajectory in ways she never could have anticipated. Later, after her friends had gone, Lily ran a bath. Something that had taken her months to feel comfortable doing again. As she sank into the warm water, she thought about Officer Donovan and his group of reform-minded officers. She thought about Chief Wilson's unexpected offer. She thought about the calls from political operatives that she'd been dodging. The raid had thrust her into an unwanted spotlight, but she had managed to redirect that light toward issues that mattered. She had turned violation into validation, trauma into transformation, not just for herself but for her community. Her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. A text from an unknown number. This is Officer Chen, retired now. Watched your speech today. Wanted you to know. That night was my last raid before retirement. Spent 22 years on the force. What you've done with this legislation might be the most important police reform I've seen in my career. Thank you. Lily read the message, twice a lump forming in her throat. She had never expected gratitude from one of the officers who had burst into her bathroom that night. As she set the phone down and leaned back in the tub, Lily finally allowed herself to feel something she'd been too busy to acknowledge during the frantic months of advocacy, a sense of healing. The nightmares about that raid had mostly subsided. The anxiety when she heard loud noises was fading. The mistrust of uniforms